forever. Today, if you guys look around, I just tied with Anderson Silva in defend the belt. So tonight is a perfect night to retire and live happy forever.
Amanda Nunes laid her 2 UFC championship belts on the octagon mat and had the cutman remove her gloves. She put the gloves in the middle of the 2 titles, kneeled down and cried into the canvas. On Saturday, after one of her most dominant performances in years, the greatest women's fighter of all time announced her retirement at UFC 289 on Saturday in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. "Double champion forever," Nunes said. "This is the perfect night to retire. I just didn't want to focus on that," Nunes said. "Focus on my fight. I don't want to keep talking about retiring all the time. As for what's next," Nunes said she plans on taking a long break and heading back to her native Brazil for a time. She has been dealing with nerve damage in both legs, she said. An issue that reoccurs every time she fights. Nunes came into the news conference Saturday night with crutches, a typical post-fight scene. Aldana was a fill-in opponent. Former champion Juliana Peña was supposed to have a trilogy fight against Nunes on Saturday, but after breaking her ribs she was forced to withdraw. When asked in the post-fight news conference what she hoped to most be remembered for, Nunes answered quickly. "The greatest of all time," Nunes said. "I did everything. I broke a lot of records." Nunes said she knew as soon as she signed the bout agreement to fight Aldana that it would be the final fight of her career. But she didn't want to bring it up until after she got the job done. Nunes beat Irene Aldana via unanimous decision, 50-43, 50-44, 50-44, in the main event of the pay-per-view card, a comprehensive performance in which Nunes won just about every minute. With the win, Nunes defended her UFC Women's Bantamweight title. She is also the UFC Women's Featherweight champion. And apparently she will vacate both belts in retirement. Nunes, 35, has the most wins in UFC women's history, 16, the most UFC title fight wins among women in history, 11, tied for the 4th most in UFC history, regardless of gender, with Anderson Silva, and the most finishes in UFC women's history, 10. The longtime Florida resident has beaten every other competitor who has held the UFC women's featherweight and bantamweight titles, including Chris Cyborg, Ronda Rousey and Holly Holm. She also owns 2 wins over former UFC women's flyweight champion Valentina Shevchenko, another all-time great. Aldana, 14-6, had won 2 straight and 7 of her past 9 fights coming into the bout. The Mexican-born fighter had finished her most recent 3 wins via TKO. Aldana, 35, has a 7-5 UFC record. Nunes was in the UFC for 10 years, accumulating a 16-2 record. Nunes outlanded Aldana 142-41 in significant strikes. That was the most significant strikes Nunes has ever landed in a UFC fight, according to ESPN Stats and Information.